Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer for accepting the paper I'm going to present today and apologize for not coming to Glasgow in person, but this was impossible due to a busy schedule. The aim of my paper is to present the result of the Pell-Mell project, which is being carried out in France during the year 2021 and 2022, and which focus on the issue of electronic messaging. In this paper, I will present a project that was carried out last year to address this need, firstly in terms of its context, then in terms of its conduct, and finally in terms of its results and the lesson that we have learned from it. Let's start with the context. This project is the result of an observation and a need. The observation is that messaging systems played an important role in the functioning of organizations since the 1990s, and that there has already been a great deal of work done on preserving emails, but abroad, I'm thinking of the work done by Christopher Prom in Urbana-Champaign, the iPad project at Stanford University, and the Raton project led by Kyle Lee at the University of North Carolina. And also in France, I'm thinking of the work we have done as part of the VITAM program. But with the conclusion that, at least in France, the question of access to messaging acquired by a records manager and archivist has been little studied and that few practical solutions exist. The need is that of the records manager of the French Ministry of Health. Email accounts account for almost 50% of the volume of electronic record acquired by this records manager over the past 10 years. 20 email accounts have been acquired by the Ministry of Health records manager since 2010. In 2022, when the French government changed, 280 email accounts were acquired by the records manager and archivist of the French ministries. However, some stakeholders have started to make very specific requests for access to records contained in these mailboxes, whether they be researcher or judge. Having the tool to carry out effective search in mailboxes is becoming an essential and urgent issue for records manager and archivist. For the expert in archival science and the records manager of the Ministry of Health, the Pell-Mell project therefore aimed to find solutions to meet this demand for access and to experiment with the potential offered by NLP technologies adapted to French language. For the computer science expert, the aim of the project was to test classification methodologies on new corpora and to see to what extent it was possible to design and develop a prototype to provide access to the mailboxes acquired by record manager and archivist, taking into account the specificities of the French language. The team in charge of the project was mainly composed of two researchers from the University of Angers in Western France, Bénédicte Grailles, lecturer in archival science, and Touria Mekki, lecturer in computer science, specialized in NLP technologies. This team was accompanied by a computer science engineer recruited for 1 year and two computer science students. Among them, there was two stakeholders, record manager from the Ministry of Health, who were responsible for the functional requirements and proposed corpus and documents needed for the test to the project team. Finally, I contributed as an expert as professor in archival science at École Nationale des Chartes in Paris and as former member of the VITAM program. I intervene here as a spokesperson for my colleagues. The Pell-Mell project has received financial support from the French Ministry of Culture. The Pell-Mell project was based on a corpus proposed by the two records managers' colleagues from the Ministry of Health. This corpus posed certain difficulties. The mailboxes selected has been acquired from two employees of the former Minister Roselyne Bachelot. Access to these mailboxes was authorized by Mrs. Bachelot, but was limited to the project member. This makes it difficult to present the result because it is not possible for the team to present messages that are not freely accessible. In addition to these two mailboxes, the team was able to benefit from the following resources provided by the Ministry of Health or freely available on the Internet. The Ministry's organization charts and calendar, the thesauri used by the Ministry's documentation service, and the speeches given by Mrs. Bachelot when she was Minister. These resources were in very different formats, and the team had to do a lot of work to harmonize them to make them usable. The slide gives you some statistics about the two mailboxes. The number of mails remains small, a little less than 9,000 mails, as does the number of senders, about 615, and recipients, a little less than 2,500. The number of threads remains limited, 35% of the mails. The messages were sent and received between 2007 and 2011. Let's now turn to the methodology proposed by the team from the University of Angers for the conduct of the project. The proposed methodology was carried out in 3 steps. The first step was to pre-process the corpus. The emails were extracted from the original PST file using the mail extract Java library designed and developed by the VITAM program team. This library extracts the structure and metadata of the message in form of an XML file and extracts the emails and their attachments in their native format. This is the email splitting task. It was also at this point that the text contained in the email signature, email attachment, and Mrs. Bachelor's speeches were extracted using the parser tool in the TK library. The extracted text was cleaned up using regular expression. This task resulted in the constitution of table in CSV format. Next, the sender and receiver of the messages were isolated to identify the network of correspondence.
So what we're going to do in
Copies consisting of personal and generic addresses had to be cleaned up with regular expression. Finally, information on the position and hierarchical affiliation of the sender was extracted from the signature attached to the email. This made it possible to enrich the database on sender and recipients and to link this data with those taken from the organization charts. The second step consists of an in-depth analysis of the email text. First, terms were extracted from the text of the email, signature and attachments using the PLDEC term extractor. Several parameters were used to improve the extraction: lemmatization, scoring, minimum word count, maximum word count. The extraction required human validation, including a comparison with the term contained in the thesaurus transmitted by the Ministry of Health. Next, the name entities were extracted by testing several Python libraries such as SpaceC and NTLK. Again, the extracted data had to be cleaned up using regular expression. The extracting person names were compared with the name of the sender and receivers extracted in the first step. Acronyms were a major problem. It was necessary to extract them using the morphosyntactic tagging proposed by Tager. The meaning of the acronyms required the intervention of the Ministry of Health Records Manager and experts because many of them were not present in the ministry thesaurus. Finally, relationships were established between the terms and the name entities. The third step was the most important one and it consists in testing NLP technologies to propose the classification of the mails. 3 methods were used to carry out this step, which was at the heart of the project. The first one is the so-called patterns method, which allows to identify semantic relation between terms. 12 relations and 11 patterns were created by applying the pre-processed corpus to the pre-processed corpus, the matcher proposed by SpaceC from regular expressions. This method certainly allowed to obtain satisfactory results, but it proved to be time-consuming insofar as it was necessary to create the patterns manually and with many silences. The second method used was clustering, applying the K-means models. The results quickly proved to be disappointing. Despite the possibility of parameterizing the tools to obtain a number of 10 clusters, the tools never made it possible to constitute more than 4. The third method combined machine learning, oriented classification, and the use of a pre-trained model, the Fauconnier model. The first task consists in constituting relevant clusters based on the thesaurus specially built by the experts. Clusters were then established by comparing the text extracted from the corpus with the thesaurus defined by the expert using the fasttext and word2vec tools. The results obtained were regularly submitted to the expert to identify the relevant and irrelevant terms gathered in each cluster. This learning phase eventually yielded satisfactory results. The email contained in the corpus were then classified according to this cluster using the Doc2Vec tool. This slide shows the cluster obtained with the clustering method. The proposed clusters are not really interesting because they mix too many dissimilar terms. The reason for their gathering was not understandable by project members. This slide shows a thesaurus specially developed by the experts by studying the mandate of Mrs. Bachelot and the structure of the budget of her ministry. As you can see, it consists of 3 levels. The first one corresponding to the terms of the mandate, the second and the third to the functional activities taken into account in the structure of the budget of the ministry. In this slide, you can see the cluster obtained with fast text and Word2Vec using the thesaurus developed by the expert. It was quite relevant, yes, but it's in French. This slide shows the result of the classification of the emails contained in the 2 mailboxes obtained with Doc2Vec tool using the cluster defined previously. The result obtained automatically seems quite relevant to the expert, even if only a comparison with the manual classification will allow this intuition to be fully verified. Finally, the project was an opportunity to design and develop 2 prototypes. The first one is intended to allow the pre-processing of the corpus and to elaborate a classification using the oriented classification method associated with the pre-trained model in French, the Fauconnier model. The prototype is based on Python library, Anaconda and PyCharm. The second is intended to allow the exploration of the mailboxes by exploiting the information extracted during the pre-processing, in-depth analysis, and oriented classification step if the user has installed a MySQL database. At the end of this project, we can already draw some conclusions. We can draw the following 5 conclusions for our experience. The first one is that the methodology applied to our corpus is entirely transposable to other corpora, corresponding to the mailboxes of other people or structures, not necessarily linked to the Ministry of Health. The second one is that it is possible to obtain good results from emails written in French using machine learning and oriented classification and pre-trained model. The first one is that this methodology implies for the expert records manager as well as the computer scientist an important initial investment, both in terms of time and parametrization. The fourth one is that for archival science expert and records manager, this methodology implies the development of new skills in linguistic and NLP technologies in order to obtain good results, which actually is not included in records manager and archivist curriculum. The fifth one is that there is still a long way to go from the prototypes designed and built during the project to a more mature software version with a user-friendly interface that can be deployed in institutions subject to strong IT security constraints such as ministry. Thank you for your attention. If you would like to know more, I will try to answer your first question. For more information, contact my colleague Bénédicte and Touria and Mekki at the University of Angers. Thank you very much.